I poured her a glass of champagne the moment the cops walked in. She smiled, completely unaware. Surrounded by her friends, posing for photos in a diamond-studded gown she'd bragged cost more than my car, my stepmother radiated the smug glow of a woman who thought she'd won. What she didn't know, what made every second of this worth it, was that I'd orchestrated every moment of this night. The guests, the drinks, even the timing of her arrest. But to understand how we got here, we have to go back. It started 7 months ago when my father died. It was sudden, a heart attack in his sleep. He was 66, strong, healthy, no warning signs. One minute he was planning his next hiking trip, the next, he was gone. My world cracked open. He'd been my anchor since my mother passed when I was 17. When he married Linda a few years later, I tried to be accepting. I wanted him to be happy. Even if she rubbed me the wrong way, too polished, too performative, too quick to insert herself into things that didn't concern her. I kept my thoughts to myself. My father was deeply in love with her. That was enough for me. Or it had been, until he died. Until the will couldn't be found. Linda told me over the phone 2 days after the funeral. Her voice was syrupy sweet, like she'd been rehearsing for an audience. "I'm so sorry, honey. The lawyer said there's no will on file. He must not have updated it after your mom passed. And well, since we were married, everything automatically transfers to me. It's just how the law works." That phrase echoed in my head for weeks. Like my father hadn't spent his whole life talking about how important estate planning was. Like he hadn't told me more than once that he'd set aside something for me in case anything ever happened. He was meticulous, a spreadsheet kind of man. There was no way he forgot to write a will. No way he left everything to her by default. Still, I tried to believe her. I didn't want to think the worst. I wanted to think she was grieving too. But then, the spending started. First, it was the new car. A sleek silver Jaguar that she parked in the driveway like a trophy. Then the renovations, contractors gutting the kitchen while the rest of the house still smelled like him. New marble counters, custom chandeliers. "He always wanted me to have this," she said when I questioned it, brushing past me like I was a guest in my own history. Then came the vacation. A 10-day Mediterranean cruise with her best girls. She posted the whole thing online, selfies in Santorini, wine tastings in Provence, spa days in Florence. She wore a silk robe in one of the videos with Mrs. H embroidered on the back, his last initial. My stomach turned. I tried asking again about the will. "Rachel," she said with a tight smile, "I understand you're upset, but digging through old paperwork won't change what is. Your father didn't leave anything for you, and honestly, he probably assumed you'd be fine on your own. You always were so independent." I wanted to scream, not because of the money, but because of what she was trying to rewrite. My father didn't assume anything. He planned, he protected, and he loved me. He would never leave me with nothing. So I started digging, quietly, carefully. Nights spent going through old emails, messages, safety deposit box keys, paperwork. And what I started to uncover didn't just point to an oversight. It pointed to something darker, something deliberate. That's when the idea formed. Slowly, like a flame catching wind. If she wanted to play dirty, fine. But she wasn't going to win. I wouldn't let her erase him, and I sure as hell wasn't going to let her get away with what she did. I just needed time, and the perfect moment to strike. Her birthday party would do nicely. The first real crack in Linda's carefully curated story came from a box of junk she didn't bother to check before sending it to Goodwill. My father had a study, a room she tried to neutralize a week after the funeral with a fresh coat of beige paint and furniture from Pottery Barn. She told me she was refreshing the space to help with her grief. I asked if I could go through his desk first. She said she'd already cleaned it out and donated the rest. Something about that stung, so I tracked down the donation center the next day and sweet-talked the manager into letting me look through the most recent drop-off. I wasn't sure what I expected, maybe a photo, a tie, something small. What I found was a cardboard box labeled John Pilot. Inside, beneath a stack of old receipts and yellowing files, was a blue folder. The label was faint, but legible. Estate documents. I didn't even open it there. I clutched it to my chest and ran straight to my car. I locked the doors, turned on the dome light, and carefully pulled the folder open. Inside was a copy of my father's will. Not a draft, not notes. A signed, notarized document dated just 6 months before his death. It was clear, detailed, and absolutely devastating to everything Linda had claimed. The will left specific personal property to her, a few things she'd probably already claimed as hers, including a necklace, a watch, and the Jaguar, ironically. But everything else, including the house, remaining bank accounts, and a $200,000 0 cents investment portfolio, were designated to me. There was even a backup executor listed, my father's longtime attorney, Martin Feldman. The document wasn't just real, it was legitimate, and Linda had lied about its existence. My hands shook as I reread it, heart pounding with a twisted mix of rage and vindication. I knew I wasn't crazy. My father had made provisions for me. He'd done what he always said he would, and she had taken it, stolen it. The question was, how? I made copies and secured the original at a friend's law office for safekeeping. Then I started pulling threads. I visited Martin Feldman's office, only to discover that he'd passed away 2 months after the will was signed. His firm had been dissolved and absorbed by a larger practice downtown. The new firm had some of his files, but nothing relating to my father. No one could explain why the will wasn't in the registry. I visited the county clerk's office. No probate filed, nothing on record. I spoke to one of Linda's neighbors, a kind, elderly woman named Irene, who remembered seeing a young man in a suit visiting the house a week after my father's death. She thought he might have been a lawyer. They met in the dining room, she said. I remember because Linda sent me a picture of the flower arrangement she'd put out for the meeting. Said she was handling business. The deeper I went, the more tangled it became. Bank accounts had been closed or transferred within days of his death. The house was quietly refinanced and leveraged for a line of credit. The investment accounts were liquidated, fast. Linda hadn't just taken what wasn't hers. She'd done it with a strategy, with speed, with intent. She knew what she was doing. And that's when I realized something else. She hadn't just taken advantage of grief and legal gray areas. She had committed fraud. But no one wanted to listen. I brought the documents to the police. The officer at the front desk was polite but skeptical. It's a civil matter, he said. You'll have to go through probate court. Without clear evidence of forgery or criminal activity, there's not much we can do. I called 3 different attorneys. 2 told me to file suit in civil court. The third was more helpful. She explained that if I could find proof the will had been deliberately hidden or destroyed, especially with financial gain involved, it could cross into criminal territory. You need something undeniable, she said, a smoking gun. That became my mission. For weeks I combed through everything, emails, text messages, credit card statements, storage records. I hired a digital forensics expert to retrieve deleted files from my father's old laptop, which Linda had thrown into the garage. Most of it was mundane, but one document, a scan of a notarized envelope dated 3 months before his death, stood out. It was addressed to Martin Feldman, containing a final copy of the will and instructions to file it. There was no tracking record, no confirmation of receipt. The file name had been renamed, Old Version, a manipulation Linda likely thought would make it seem irrelevant. But the metadata told the truth. She had accessed the file 2 days after his death. My forensics guy looked at me across the table and said, "You know this is proof of tampering, right?" I nodded. I was furious but focused. "Can you extract it into a report?" "Absolutely." While that was in progress, I went digging on the bank accounts. My father's primary account had been drained in stages, $60,000 0 cents within 10 days of his death. One transfer caught my eye, $14.50 to a design consultant. The name matched a man I'd seen in one of Linda's social media posts. I reached out, posing as someone interested in hiring him for a remodel. During our chat, I casually asked about his past clients. He gushed about a high-end birthday party he helped organize for a client named Linda H. She wanted it luxe, he said. "We're talking crystal everything, real orchids. The cake alone cost $3,000. Wait, when was this? Oh, that was last April, I think. Yeah. Springtime, right after her husband passed. Said she needed something life-affirming. I didn't hang up. I thanked him. Then I got in my car and drove to the police department. Again. This time, I brought a binder. I sat down with a detective in financial crimes and laid out everything. The will, the forensic report, the bank records, the testimony from the neighbor, the decorator, even screenshots of Linda's Instagram posts from the party. I showed them that she accessed and deleted a legal document, that she transferred assets before probate, that she lied to the county, that she used the money on luxury, not debts. And I showed them the will my father had signed, giving everything to me. The detective sat in silence for several minutes, flipping through the pages. Then he looked at me and said, "This isn't just shady, it's criminal. And I think we can move on it." That's when I knew it was happening. It would take time, but I'd planted the seeds, and I already knew the perfect moment for the arrest. Her birthday party was 2 months away. She was planning it like a coronation. Invitations had already gone out. She wanted a custom tent, a jazz band, white glove servers, celebrating life, she called it. I called it poetic timing. All I needed now was patience and a front row seat. I didn't attend the party planning meetings. I watched them unfold on social media. Linda was proud of her so-called milestone celebration, throwing around buzzwords like elegant, timeless, and couture. She posted mood boards, snapshots of the venue, samples of linens and floral arrangements, even snippets of jazz musicians rehearsing. Every post was curated to showcase wealth, power, and the effortless glamour of a woman who'd come out on top. Her captions were insufferable, celebrating strength, survival, and reinvention as if she were a war hero instead of a woman who stole her dead husband's estate. The comments flooded in with admiration. "Queen energy, you deserve it all, so fabulous." While I sat in silence with the knowledge that her kingdom was built on fraud. What no one knew was that, behind the scenes, I was tightening the noose. Once the detective confirmed they would be pursuing a case, the investigation began to unfold quickly. They subpoenaed bank records, interviewed the decorator I had spoken with, and dug into every transfer Linda had made post-mortem. She was sloppy. In her greed, she hadn't even tried to cover her tracks. She'd wired tens of thousands into accounts under her own name, claimed my father had no will, and filed fraudulent affidavits with the probate court stating she was the sole heir. Every single move was a violation, and now that we had the original will, the forensic report, and the metadata showing her accessing and deleting the digital version, it was more than enough. But the detective wanted one more thing, a statement on tape, something irrefutable. If she says anything at all that implies knowledge or intent, especially about the will, that's gold, he told me. You know her better than anyone, can you get her talking? It wasn't a question, it was a challenge. So I played the long game. I called Linda and pretended to extend an olive branch. I said I wanted to find a way to move forward, that I'd been thinking about how distant we'd become since Dad died. I lied through my teeth, told her I missed having some form of family, and asked if we could get coffee. She hesitated for a moment, probably suspicious, but her ego won out. She couldn't resist the idea of me crawling back, acknowledging her control. "Of course, sweetheart," she said with fake warmth. "It's about time we put the past behind us." I chose a boutique cafe she liked, brought a gift bag with a scented candle, and wore something understated. I needed her to feel superior. I needed her to drop her guard. I also needed her to sit directly across from me so the tiny microphone I'd clipped to the inside of my purse could catch every word. She started with surface pleasantries, as expected, complimented my hair, asked vague questions about work, bragged about her Pilates schedule. I let her talk. Then I carefully steered the conversation toward the estate. I asked gently if she ever found any papers from my father. "You know, I just kept thinking there had to be something," I said. "I don't blame you, of course. I know how messy things can get. I just wish he'd thought ahead." She took the bait. Linda leaned in, swirling her overpriced matcha, and smiled. "You really think John didn't plan things?" "Oh, Rachel, of course he did. He had everything down to the letter," she laughed, almost fondly. "But sometimes plans get rearranged. Life moves on." I tilted my head and forced a smile. "So there was a will." She met my eyes, calm and smug. "There were a lot of things. But let's be honest, he didn't really expect you to take care of the property or the finances. He knew I'd manage it better. He told me so." That was a lie, but a revealing one. She continued, careless now, enjoying her self-appointed role as Queen of the Ashes. "He was sentimental, sure. He left some things with your name on them. A binder, maybe? A flash drive? But none of it mattered. Not once I filed the paperwork. You know how easy it is when no one questions you? My blood ran cold. I couldn't believe how openly she was talking. I gave her nothing, no reaction, no raised eyebrow, not even a blink. She kept going. And honestly, Rachel, you wouldn't have known what to do with any of it. The house, the accounts, the investments. You would have sold it all and wasted the money. This way, at least it's being used. She sipped her drink. You should thank me. I managed to excuse myself without flipping the table. I walked to the car, shut the door, and immediately sent the audio to the detective. She admitted to everything, I said. She admitted there was a will, and she admitted to hiding it. His response came within minutes. This seals it. Let's schedule execution. Execution? The word made me smile for the first time in days. The next few weeks were a blur of logistics. The department filed for a warrant, confirmed the identity of the notary she faked, and prepared the arrest. I kept my head down and said nothing. The party grew closer, and Linda went into full production mode. She posted about fittings, tastings, and deliveries. She rented a hall with a glass ceiling and booked a live quartet. She hired a photographer who used drones. The guest list was stacked with local influencers, lawyers, realtors, and anyone who'd ever praised her taste in handbags. She was drunk on her own image, and it was glorious to watch. 2 days before the party, I got a call from the detective. We're good to go, he said. It'll happen at the event. We want the timing to be precise, public enough that she can't spin it. I'll be there, I said. I picked a sleek black dress, elegant but forgettable. I didn't want to stand out. I wanted to blend in. Linda greeted me at the door with a faux surprised expression, holding a flute of champagne and wearing a floor-length gold gown that sparkled so aggressively it looked like a disco ball under the chandeliers. You made it, she said, air-kissing my cheek. I wasn't sure you'd come. I wouldn't miss it, I said, smiling so tightly my jaw ached. The party was lavish, crystal centerpieces, signature cocktails, plated hors d'oeuvres passed by waiters in white gloves. Every guest seemed entranced by Linda's version of reality. She walked the room like a first lady, giving speeches, posing for staged candidates, whispering about the next phase of her career. I kept my eyes on the clock. The detective told me the team would arrive at 8:45 p.m. sharp. I watched her pose near the dessert table, hand resting on the tablecloth like she owned the world. Then I saw the uniformed officers enter quietly through the side entrance. They scanned the crowd, located her, and walked directly toward the birthday girl. Linda was mid-laugh when they reached her. Ma'am, one officer said calmly, we need to speak with you. She blinked in surprise, then flicked her hair back. Is this about the parking situation? I thought we had permits. The other officer stepped forward. You're under arrest for estate fraud, forgery, obstruction of justice, and perjury. You have the right to remain silent. Her face fell. The party fell silent. Someone gasped. A few people raised their phones. Linda stammered, wait, this has to be a mistake. I don't understand. Rachel? She turned to me, eyes wide with panic. What's going on? I walked forward slowly and handed her the champagne I'd been holding. You dropped this, I said. She didn't take it. The officers led her away in cuffs as the flash of cameras and murmurs of guests followed her down the hall. And just like that, her empire of lies crumbled. On her terms, in her spotlight, with all eyes watching. It was everything I'd imagined, and it wasn't over yet, not even close. The moment the police escorted Linda out of that glittering ballroom in handcuffs, a silence fell over the party like a vacuum. It was surreal. This woman who had spent months curating her image as the elegant, untouchable widow was now stumbling in stilettos toward the exit, flanked by officers with blank faces. Her guests didn't know whether to gasp or film. A few did both. Someone whispered, "What just happened?" And someone else muttered, "Fraud, I think." But no one stepped forward to defend her. Her designer friends, her real estate cronies, the country club crowd. They all stood still, frozen between politeness and scandal, unwilling to get too close to something that now stank of criminality. I stayed just long enough to watch the flash of blue and red lights reflect against the high-gloss marble as the patrol car pulled away. Then I turned, walked calmly to my car, and drove off into the night. My pulse was steady, my breath even, but inside, I was on fire. The next morning, the story broke. A local news blog picked it up first, then a regional outlet reposted it with a headline that read, "Prominent socialite arrested for defrauding late husband's estate." My phone started buzzing before I even got out of bed. Texts, voicemails, even emails from people I hadn't spoken to in years. Friends, distant relatives, former classmates, all reaching out with a version of the same message. Is this true? Did this really happen? Are you okay? But they weren't asking out of concern, not really. They were hungry for the gossip, for the drama, for a glimpse behind the mask Linda had worn so successfully for so long. I didn't respond. I had no interest in satisfying their curiosity. Let them read the court filings like everyone else. That day, I went to see the detective. We sat in a quiet conference room in the back of the station as he walked me through what would come next. Linda had been charged with 4 counts, 1 for forging legal documents, 1 for obstruction of justice by destroying a known will, 1 for falsifying affidavits in probate court, and 1 for misappropriation of estate funds. "She's looking at a serious case," he said, tapping his pen on the folder in front of him. "The fact that she liquidated assets so quickly and so thoroughly is bad for her. It shows intent. And your audio recording, combined with the forensic metadata, builds a narrative of premeditated fraud. Honestly, I've seen people go to prison for less." I asked what the timeline would be, and he explained that it could take months, even a year, for a full trial, but that the DA's office was already preparing charges. In the meantime, the court would freeze her assets and appoint a forensic accountant to trace the stolen funds. The idea of her bank accounts being frozen made me smile. I hadn't gone into this for revenge, not really. I'd wanted the truth out, wanted my father's wishes honored, but watching her squirm under the weight of her own arrogance, that part was deeply satisfying. Still, the legal process was just one piece. There was still the matter of the estate. The house was in her name now, the investment accounts emptied, the will ignored. But now that a criminal case was underway, I could reopen probate. My father's original will would be reintroduced, and if the court accepted it as valid, the estate would legally revert to its intended distribution, meaning me. The lawyer I hired specialized in contested wills. She was sharp, no nonsense, and quietly thrilled by the strength of my documentation. "This is clean," she said after reviewing the file. "You're going to win." I filed the probate motion the same week Linda was arraigned. The court scheduled a hearing 2 weeks out. In the meantime, I kept my distance from the media storm. Linda's story was everywhere. The same people who had worshipped her taste in interior design were now dissecting her downfall. Her mugshot went viral, especially after someone paired it with a photo from her birthday party and captioned it, "From pearls to prison." That one made me laugh. I wouldn't admit it to anyone, but I saved the image to my phone. It took 4 days for the first of Linda's so-called friends to reach out. A woman named Sharon, who used to co-host luncheons with her, emailed me with a sugary apology. "I'm so sorry you had to go through this," she wrote. "I always suspected something was off. If there's anything I can do." I didn't respond. Neither did I respond to the realtor who once told me I should be more grateful for everything Linda had done, or the boutique owner who once claimed Linda kept that family together. Let them sit in their silence now. I owed them nothing. 2 weeks later, we went to court. Linda appeared in a gray pantsuit, much plainer than her usual attire, with her hair tied back and minimal makeup. She looked smaller somehow, like the illusion had finally broken. Her attorney, a man with slicked back hair and too much cologne, argued that the new will was the only one that should be recognized, that my father may have considered other drafts, but only the final executed version, which had mysteriously vanished, could be trusted. He tried to discredit the will I'd found, suggesting it was fabricated despite the forensic evidence and the notary confirmation. My attorney stayed calm and methodical. She presented every page, every timestamp, every digital trace. She had the notary on standby via video call, ready to testify that she had indeed witnessed my father sign that document. The court listened, reviewed, considered. Then the judge spoke. The court finds sufficient evidence that the decedent's original will, dated March 3rd of last year, was valid and executed in good faith. Given the defendant's failure to disclose said document and the compelling proof of willful obstruction, we hereby reinstate the will and approve the reallocation of estate assets in accordance with the original terms. Linda didn't speak. She didn't cry. She didn't even look at me. She just sat there stone-faced as everything she'd taken unraveled. After the ruling, the house was placed into an administrative transition, pending full transfer to my name. The investment firm began reinstating the portfolio, tracking down what could be recovered. The court ordered a full audit of Linda's spending. Every dollar she'd taken had to be accounted for. The DA's office filed a motion to use the reinstated estate as grounds for criminal restitution, which meant not only was she facing prison time, she'd also be financially ruined. I visited the house a week after the hearing. She was already gone. The place looked different, emptier, cold. The marble counters she'd installed were clean but lifeless, the custom curtains gone, even the wine fridge had been removed. I walked through each room slowly, touching the walls, the door frames, the mantel above the fireplace. I didn't cry. I didn't need to. The place didn't feel like home anymore. It felt like a battlefield I'd won. Still, I was glad to have it back. I planned to sell it eventually. The house wasn't him. My father had been warmth and woods and messy camping trips, not quartz countertops and chandeliers, but for now, I wanted to be the one to decide its future, not her. She had made enough decisions for both of us. As I locked the door behind me, I looked over the empty living room one last time and thought about everything I'd gone through. The lies, the manipulation, the silence from people who should have known better, but also the strength I'd found, the clarity, the resolve. My father once told me doing the right thing isn't always comfortable, but it's always worth it. He was right. And justice, I'd learned, is rarely clean, but it is always, always satisfying. After the court reinstated my father's original will, I expected the chaos to settle. I thought maybe Linda would slink away, quietly accept defeat and vanish into obscurity. That was naive. Instead, she doubled down, filing an appeal, publicly accusing me of forging documents, and even trying to rally sympathy from her ever-dwindling social circle. A few of her more deluded friends took to Facebook, calling the ruling a travesty and painting me as a greedy stepdaughter trying to destroy a grieving widow. One even accused me of tearing apart a beautiful woman's life over money. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. The facts were out. The law had spoken, and Linda, she was unraveling in real time right in front of everyone. The appeal didn't go far. Her lawyer tried to argue technicalities, claiming the original will hadn't been properly stored, that the notary record wasn't valid, that digital files couldn't be trusted, but the judge saw right through it. The forensic evidence held, the witness testimony was airtight, and the previous ruling stood. Her assets remained frozen. The estate was officially transferred to me. That was the end of her legal maneuverings, but she still had her mouth, and she used it. In the weeks following the appeal's denial, I started receiving strange calls, private numbers, hang-ups. Once, someone left a voicemail that said nothing but heavy breathing, then hung up. My car alarm went off 3 nights in a row with no explanation. At first, I thought I was being paranoid, but then I found a small crack in my windshield. Too clean, too centered to be accidental. The mechanic confirmed it was likely from a direct hit. Could have been a rock, he said, or something thrown. I didn't mention that I'd parked in my garage. That's when I knew Linda wasn't done. She couldn't win legally, so she was trying to rattle me, intimidate me, maybe even scare me into backing off. But she still didn't understand me. She didn't know that I don't flinch. Not anymore. I installed cameras. Front door, back door, driveway. I alerted the police, filed a report, and handed over the strange calls. Nothing solid came of it, but the paper trail was there. I wasn't going to let her take another inch of my life, not my sleep, not my safety, not my peace. And I certainly wasn't going to let her poison the narrative. That's when I decided it was time to go public. I didn't want to speak to the press. It felt tacky, self-serving. But I was done letting her control the story, so I agreed to sit down with a local investigative journalist who'd been following the case since the arrest. We met in a quiet cafe and I laid it all out. My father's original will, the forged documents, the deleted files, the forensic evidence, the timeline of Linda's deception. I didn't editorialize. I didn't exaggerate. I let the truth speak for itself. When the article published, it included screenshots of the will, quotes from the judge's ruling, and commentary from legal experts who called the case a textbook example of estate fraud. The journalist didn't mince words. Linda Holloway used manipulation, forgery, and fraud to cut her stepdaughter out of a legal inheritance. Thanks to diligence, documentation, and a refusal to be silenced, that daughter fought back and won. The story spread. First, it was just in the local paper, then it was shared on regional news blogs, then it hit a national legal podcast. People ate it up, not because of me, but because of the arc. People love a takedown, they love a villain getting caught, and Linda, she was the perfect villain. Beautiful, arrogant, entitled, and now publicly humiliated. She stopped posting online. Her accounts went dark. Her face disappeared from the charity boards and the country club's event calendar. People who once praised her ghosted her. She became a cautionary tale, an example whispered in polite circles about what happens when greed overrides integrity. But I wasn't done yet. The court had ordered restitution, and a financial investigator was assigned to trace every dollar Linda had touched. It turned out she hadn't just spent the money on luxury. She had hidden assets, an account in Nevada, a small investment portfolio under a friend's name, even a storage unit filled with expensive furniture and artwork that hadn't been reported. One by one, they were uncovered, frozen, liquidated, and redirected to the estate. In total, nearly $680,000, 0 cents of the original $820, 0 cents, was recovered. Some of it had been lost. She'd burned through a significant chunk in her effort to live like royalty, but what remained was enough. I used the funds to restore what she had torn apart. I set up a scholarship in my father's name at his alma mater, something he'd always wanted to do but never got around to. I donated to the hospital where he'd volunteered. I even refurbished the local park where he used to take me as a kid, commissioning a bench with a plaque that read, "For John Holloway, who believed in leaving things better than he found them." But I wasn't interested in sainthood. I also bought back his cabin, the one Linda had sold without telling me, claiming it was just an old shack in the woods. It wasn't. It was the place he'd taught me how to fish, where we spent every 4th of July, where we scattered my mother's ashes after her passing. Buying it back felt like reclaiming something sacred. I kept the original porch swing and nothing else. The rest I gutted, stripped away every trace of Linda's decor and started from scratch. I filled it with things that reminded me of him, a vinyl record player, old books, a shelf of black and white photos, a framed copy of his will hung above the fireplace. Not because I needed the reminder, but because I wanted the story to be complete. The last time I saw Linda was at the final restitution hearing. She looked gaunt, tired, her makeup was smudged, her hair pulled back tightly like she was trying to hold herself together physically since everything else was falling apart. She didn't speak, not to me, not to the judge. She just sat there, silent, while the attorney read through the financial report. The judge asked if she had anything to say before sentencing. She shook her head. The sentence was light, 18 months probation, a suspended jail term due to her lack of prior record and compliance with restitution. Part of me wanted more. I wanted to see her in an orange jumpsuit, scrubbing floors in some county facility. But the truth is, she was already serving a sentence, one far more enduring than a cell. She'd lost everything, her freedom, her reputation, her money, her future. And worst of all for her, she'd lost the story. She no longer got to be the grieving widow or the successful socialite. Now, she was the woman who tried to erase a daughter's place in her father's life, and failed. As we exited the courthouse, I didn't look at her. She didn't look at me. We existed in different realities now. She in the ruins she built, me in the legacy I reclaimed. That night, I sat on the porch swing at the cabin, wrapped in a blanket, listening to the crickets. I thought about everything I'd lost and everything I'd taken back. People often ask if I'm angry, if I still hate her. The answer is no. I don't hate Linda. I don't think about her at all. Because when you win, truly win, you don't waste time on the person who tried to steal your victory. You sit in peace, and you let them drown in the silence you left behind. Even after the courtroom doors closed and the restitution payments began to trickle in, the shadows Linda cast didn't disappear entirely. The legal victories were real, the money was coming back, and my father's legacy was intact. But the emotional toll of the entire ordeal lingered longer than I expected. Revenge is satisfying, yes, but it doesn't sew everything back together. It doesn't erase the months spent digging through lies, the sleepless nights wondering if justice would ever come, or the grief of losing a parent and realizing you had to fight tooth and nail to preserve his memory. What Linda tried to take from me wasn't just material. She tried to erase the relationship I had with my father, tried to rewrite history in her favor, and that was the wound. I didn't know how to dress. I kept busy. I poured myself into organizing the scholarship program and making sure the renovations on the cabin were completed before winter. I met with the accountant weekly to track the remaining assets and ensure Linda stayed in compliance with the court-ordered repayment plan. I worked with a local historian to help catalog some of my father's personal papers and community service projects for a small exhibit at the local library. I even helped archive some of the volunteer work he'd done over the years. People started calling it the Holloway Wall, and seeing his name honored without Linda's fingerprints anywhere near it made something tight in my chest begin to loosen. Still, not everything was as simple to restore. The house, for instance, was technically mine now, but I couldn't bring myself to live in it. Every room felt like a battlefield. I remembered the smell of Linda's perfume lingering in the hallways, her voice echoing in the kitchen as she barked orders at contractors, the coldness in her eyes the day she told me there was no will. I'd walked through it several times looking for a feeling of home, but it never came. Even after removing the furniture, even after repainting the walls, something about the air still felt wrong. It was a place where something sacred had been violated. So I listed it. It sold to a young family with 2 little boys and a golden retriever. They sent me a thank you card after closing, saying how excited they were to build memories there. That, strangely, brought closure. Let them make something good in that space. Let the house be happy again. I didn't need to possess it, I just needed to know that Linda didn't. I thought that would be the end of it, but Linda wasn't quite finished. A month after the restitution hearing, I received a letter. Not from a lawyer, there were no formalities this time, but directly from Linda, written in pen on cream-colored stationery that still carried the faint scent of whatever overpriced perfume she used to wear. The handwriting was unmistakable. Sharp, controlled, the same way she used to sign receipts at fancy boutiques. It wasn't a confession, it wasn't an apology, it was an explanation, or more accurately, a justification. She started by saying how hard it had been to lose my father, how much he'd meant to her and how alone she felt without him. She talked about how much pressure there was to maintain appearances, how scared she was of losing everything. She claimed she never meant to steal from me, that she believed she was protecting the estate, making sure it didn't fall into the hands of someone who wasn't ready to manage it. Then she wrote the line that sealed the letter's fate. In time, I hope you'll understand why I did what I did, and maybe one day forgive me. I didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. You don't forgive someone who burns your house down and then sends you a letter saying the fire helped you appreciate minimalism. I didn't need her remorse, especially not the kind wrapped in ego. I folded the letter, slipped it into a manila envelope, and gave it to my attorney, just in case she ever tried anything again. The irony was, while Linda was trying to spin her fall into a misunderstood tragedy, I was moving on with a kind of quiet pride. The cabin became my sanctuary. I'd drive out every weekend, sometimes bringing friends, sometimes going alone. I read there, wrote there, hiked the trails my dad once took me on. I planted a small herb garden behind the shed, not because I needed the basil, but because I liked the routine. I slept better in that space than anywhere else. No ghosts, no echoes, just pine trees and silence, and the slow, deliberate process of healing. Then came the news I hadn't expected. The same journalist who first interviewed me about the case reached out again. She said there was interest from a documentary producer who focused on legal dramas and financial crimes. They wanted to feature the story in a mini-series about estate fraud and inheritance disputes. At first, I said no. I didn't want to relive it all to turn my trauma into someone else's entertainment. But after sitting with it for a few days, I reconsidered. Maybe if people understood what these schemes looked like, how clean they could be, how polite, how easily masked by grief and charm, they'd be better equipped to protect themselves. Maybe my story could help someone else recognize the red flags before it was too late. So I agreed on the condition that I retained editorial oversight and that my father's name was treated with respect. Filming started a few months later. The crew came out to the cabin. We shot interviews in the living room and on the deck where my dad used to drink his morning coffee. I told them everything, not with rage, not with bitterness, but with clarity. I laid out how Linda had tried to erase me from my own father's legacy and how I'd refused to let her succeed. I showed them the bench I'd placed in the local park, the scholarship fund, the old family photos I'd restored. I wanted the story to end not with revenge, but with reclamation. When the episode aired, the response was overwhelming. People wrote letters, sent emails, commented online. Some shared their own stories of betrayal and fraud. Others simply said thank you. It was strange, being seen like that, being known. But it felt good, too. Like something final had been marked, like the last piece of the past had been closed. Linda, as far as I knew, disappeared from public life. The last update I heard was that she moved out of state, using the remainder of her retirement savings to rent a small house near her sister. She was no longer on social media, no public appearances, her name no longer showed up in charity events or real estate boards, just a quiet vanishing. She became a cautionary tale, a ghost that once haunted my life but now lingered only in whispers. And I kept building, not just a life but a legacy, one rooted in truth and dignity and the kind of strength my father would have been proud of. Revenge had been sweet, but recovery? Recovery was everything. 1 year after Linda's arrest, I returned to the cabin alone. It was early fall, the trees beginning to shift into golden amber, the air crisp enough to see my breath in the mornings. I hadn't been back for a few weeks. Work had picked up, the documentary's release stirred a second wave of attention, and the estate had finally closed out for good. But as I pulled up the gravel path, the tires crunching beneath me, I felt that familiar sense of stillness. The way this place always seemed to quiet everything inside me, I stepped out and inhaled deeply, letting the scent of pine and damp earth wash over me. This was home. Not the kind with a mortgage and utilities and neighbors you half know, but the kind that anchors you, the kind that stays. Inside, everything was just as I'd left it, the shelves lined with my father's old books, the stone fireplace with a new stack of wood waiting to be lit, the framed copy of his reinstated will still hanging above the mantel, not out of vanity, but because it mattered. It reminded me that truth, no matter how deeply buried, could be pulled back into the light, that silence could be broken, that legacies could be reclaimed. I made tea, wrapped myself in a worn flannel blanket, and sat on the porch swing he'd built himself 30 years earlier. The wind rustled through the trees in that soft, rhythmic way that always sounded like the woods breathing. I thought back on everything, not with bitterness, not even with anger, but with a kind of distant awe. The lengths Linda had gone to, the lies she'd crafted with such care, the way she'd underestimated me at every turn. I don't know if it was misogyny, arrogance, or just blind greed, but she never saw me as a threat. To her, I was just the inconvenient stepdaughter, the emotional liability she had to maneuver around. And maybe for a while I had been. I grieved quietly. I didn't make waves. I tried to keep the peace. But losing my father changed that. It wasn't just grief that sharpened me. It was the refusal to let someone erase him, to turn his memory into a transaction. Linda didn't just try to steal money. She tried to rewrite the narrative. My revenge wasn't about punishing her. It was about restoring what was true. And now, with everything settled, with the estate back where it belonged and her voice no longer controlling the story, I could finally breathe freely again. There were still traces of her out there, I'm sure, people who whispered, people who believed her version. But I'd stopped caring. The truth didn't need their approval. It had already done its job. I opened the small journal I kept in the drawer by the bed. I didn't write in it often, only when something felt too important to let pass unrecorded. I wrote about the scholarship students, the first recipients who sent thank you letters and shared their dreams. I wrote about a letter I'd received from a woman in Oregon who said the documentary gave her the courage to challenge her brother in court over their father's estate. I wrote about the neighbor down the road who stopped by with a homemade pie saying her late husband used to fish with mine, and how glad she was the cabin was back in Holloway hands. These were the things that mattered now. Quiet victories, real things, honest lives. That night, I lit a fire and played my father's favorite record on the old turntable I'd found in storage. The crackle of vinyl filled the room as the flames flickered, casting shadows on the log walls. I poured a glass of wine, sat in his old chair, and let the moment settle. There was no grand ceremony, no speech, no final confrontation, just me, sitting in the place he'd loved most, finally able to feel the peace he'd always found here. I had taken back what she tried to destroy. I had rebuilt what she hoped would collapse, and in doing so, I didn't just get justice, I got freedom. And that, more than anything, is what revenge should be. Not rage, not retribution, but a life so whole, so grounded, so deeply your own, that the person who tried to break you is left with nothing but the echo of your silence. And you? You get everything they never thought you were strong enough to keep.